Welcome to Eye on the Illini. This is Mike Cagley. We've got Cooper Perkins with us, a USC insider who has worked with Larry and Brad and I on multiple occasions, and one of our favorite guests, and we like to bring him back. And he is going to talk to us a little bit about USC. But Cooper, how are things going for you out there on the left coast?
Things are good. It's as soon as you get to the end of September, it cools off a little bit. So we're all getting comfortable. It's the right time for football season to be in full swing. And if you're looking at it from a Trojan perspective, it's a good start to the season.
Yeah, I tell you what, I'm not a huge Lincoln Riley guy, so I tend to discount them a little bit, and that's comes generally I usually end up kind of wrong on that. But this year, that offense is just smoking, and it seems like the defense is taking a few steps forward, maybe compared to the recent past.
Yeah, I think the best place to start to give Illini fans a real sense of perspective on maybe why this USC team is different than the last couple of seasons is in the offseason, they actually went out and hired Notre Dame's general manager, Chad Bowden, to come be the general manager at USC. And so, functionally speaking, Lincoln Riley is now an offensive coordinator who also oversees the defense. He wouldn't acknowledge that as what his job is. He's
Yep.
the head coach. But Chad Bowden, in my opinion, and people that I'm connected to, is one of, if not the best general managers in the college football space. And there's a reason they have the top ranked recruiting class right now in 2026. So I think that's changed the paradigm a little bit in terms of what this USC program looks like organizationally. And in the first 4 games, offensively speaking, Lincoln Riley looks like the Lincoln Riley of Oklahoma days. And that's interesting because, last year in the Big Ten introduction, there was a real shift in philosophy towards playing these limited possession style games, really focusing on setting up the defense to not fail as opposed to setting up the offense to succeed. And I think there was just a lack of philosophical clarity that kind of permeated its way throughout the program. And Danton Lynn, the defensive coordinator who they hired away from UCLA, certainly brought a lot more structure, much better communication, just a generally better scheme to
Yep.
the defensive side. I mean, it's not hard to have a better scheme than Alex Grinch, but you still have to functionally implement it right and get guys playing it.
Yeah.
So I think that piece with the general manager in the equation throws out the last couple of years. Lincoln looks like he's got his swagger back, for lack of a better explanation. I mean, the guy is locked in on the offensive side and allowing Danton Lynn to run the defensive side. And there are pros to that. There are cons to that. But, I think it would be a mistake to just look at the last couple of seasons and say USC's on a slide. Lincoln Riley, has lost it or never had it. He's an Oklahoma guy only. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and that organizational structure is a big reason why.
Now, one of the things that comes up is when you hear somebody improving their recruiting, having a GM's awesome, but are there any, for lack of better words, are there any fundraising successes in terms of getting boosters to jump on board and maybe partake in that? Because I think that is probably the biggest difference between a Big Ten school and maybe even an SEC school is most of the Big Ten has, list of billionaires that goes into the 20s, maybe even the 30s that they can call upon. Has USC made those calls and have they been answered?
Yeah, what's interesting with USC is it's not about making fresh calls. It's about rekindling relationships that became strained at another point. There was about a 10 to 15-year window in there where the guy whose namesake is on the practice field, Brian Kennedy, stopped donating to the program altogether. There are some instances like that where one of the primary things that Chad Bowden's done is come in and kind of revitalize some of these relationships and re-inspire those people who really do have an opportunity and ability to contribute to the program in a meaningful way. As far as I understand it, the fundraising has been vastly better. It's certainly been much more aggressive and much more active. And as it applies to recruiting, it's been aggressive strategically as it pertains to the margins of the rules, I think would be the best
Oh,
way to
yeah.
put it. Prior to the House settlement coming into effect, they made a really aggressive push to get as many players locked into contracts as they could. I don't have this from University Authority, but I work in the high school football space, calling a game of the week in Southern California. So I have this from the other side. There are a lot of high-level recruits who are, making money to be high school football players right now that are committed to USC. And it's a different world. I'm not sure that I like it, even as a USC fan and alumnus and insider whose alma mater benefits from that kind of infrastructure. I don't know that I think it's better for the game in the big picture. But when you talk about organizational development, reorganizing in like a business sense, really is what it is. They've wasted no expense and passed up no expense to try and build the best infrastructure possible, because there's pressure from the top to do exactly that. And it manifests not just in recruiting, but we're also starting to see it for the first time on the field.
Yeah, and of course, there's not a lot of choice that you have if you're USC and you want to get back to where you used to. You're competing with Phil Knight, and Oregon doesn't seem to have too many problems getting people to go out in the middle of nowhere to play sports. And you look at Ohio State with what probably, arguably, certainly is one of the top 3 to 5 at highest payrolls in college sports. You have Michigan spending a lot of money and not necessarily worrying about any type of rules, looking at the Connor Stallions thing. And you have Indiana with Eli Lilly money and Mark Cuban, who are making a move upward in the league. Illinois has made news, of course, got $100 million from Geese. So now it's Geese Memorial Stadium. So you're seeing this compilation, and then people who don't have a great funding source set up, such as Wisconsin, are falling behind and not getting to the level that they used to be in the past. So it seems like USC is on good footing for the future.
Yeah, just one quick thought on that subject. I think there was a tremendous amount of concern in USC circles for the better part of 5 years that they didn't take things seriously enough to compete in the new world of football. I think that there probably was an expectation more than a fear that they would not choose to go the route that they've chosen. This comes as a surprise, quite frankly, that the university at like an administrative level at the top pulled as much of a 180 as they did, because in the immediate aftermath of the 2009 sanctions, from the Pete Carroll years, the administration took a very, very conservative approach to a fault. And I don't think there are very many people in the USC sphere who would disagree with that idea. But they've pivoted to full aggression. And I think a lot of that circles around who is pulling strings at the top of the university. They've had a change. They've had 2 changes in leadership at the presidency of the university. And the board of trustees has gone through a full reshuffling. So a name that people may or may not be familiar with on a national level, who is a massive deal in Los Angeles, is Rick Caruso. He's a real estate mogul who owns probably 60% of Los Angeles and the surrounding area. And also has run for mayor twice. He's now the chair of the board of trustees, and he's a big football guy. So it makes a little bit of sense when you look at kind of how those personnel roles have changed. But it is quite surprising. 3-4 years ago, I don't think we would have expected anything like this.
Yeah, that I liked it better the old way, but this is what it means to compete, and of course, this is how the future is going to look. So as we go and kind of look at this, Illini fans, they see USC going up the rankings, starting off extremely well this year. Talk to us about that offense, because when I looked at where the offense was statistically, they're 5th in scoring in the country, only 9 points ahead of that dreaded Indiana team that just thrashed Illinois. In terms of first downs, this team is 9th in the country, completion percentage 9th, passing offensive yards 11th, rushing offensive yards 12th, total offensive yards number 3, only 5 yards a game behind Indiana. So they have put together an offense that looks like the Pete Carroll era USC offenses. Let's start at the quarterback and talk about what makes it go.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the quarterback position was one of 2 spots on the offense that the fan base had the most question and concern about coming into the season. Jaden Mayava, who started 4 games last season as a redshirt sophomore who transferred from UNLV. Very much is the poster child of high ceiling, low floor. The physical tools are there. The kid can throw it with the best of them. He's got pretty good legs on him and does a lot of things intangibly that are impressive. In terms of his understanding of football, there was a lot of moments in that 4-game stretch last year that were nauseatingly frustrating. And the Texas A&M bowl game matchup is the best illustration of this. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I shut the game off. It was 24-7. I was done with it. And here comes Jaden Mayava, who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn and had 2 interceptions in the game, leads him back with 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter and is essentially flawless against an SEC defense. He's picked up not where he's left off, but 10 steps further down the development road. It's astonishing how far he's come. And I think that can be attributed to 2 things. The first of which is that USC does have a full-time quarterbacks coach who is not Lincoln Riley now, and that makes a big difference. Luke Heward is the quarterbacks coach. He'd previously been a receivers coach, but that Heward name in quarterback circles, I think, carries a lot of water, and he's done a really nice job in one-on-one development. The other aspect being Lincoln Riley is freed up because of the general manager situation to do less in recruiting, to worry about defense less and worry about personnel less, that he's now a little bit more focused on offense, and the quarterback is reaping benefits from that. And what makes him special to this point is that he's not making mistakes. And that is probably the biggest upset of the season for USC. The fact that the quarterback has not turned the ball over yet this year through 4 games. If you were putting money on that before the season, you would be making a big chunk of change right now. But he's a special player and a special talent who does still need to continue proving the ability to avoid those mistakes. But on the affirmative side, the things he's been able to do, he's stretching the field vertically. He's been extremely accurate in the vertical passing game. He's been really accurate with touch in the intermediate passing game. The command of the offense and the command of the team from a leadership standpoint has been striking to just about everyone, especially folks who don't watch closely and kind of parachute in to see USC here and there. They've been astonished to see, Jaden Mayava has a really different way about him than like a Caleb Williams did. And that was a successful guy who led a team just short of the playoffs a few years ago. And this guy has a better command and control of his team. He's got a better set of relationships with his teammates. And so I think there's a lot to be inspired by from the USC side and a lot to be afraid of as an opponent. But, if we're being honest with ourselves, as we have to be, he still is turnover prone and vulnerable until there is a body of work that suggests those problems are truly behind him. It's football and it's a math equation to some extent. The law of large numbers says he's going to throw some picks at some point. Is it this week? Is it next week? Is it not for 4 more weeks? Whenever that happens, it's going to be a big difference and the game's going to change. I think from a talent standpoint, he's as talented as any quarterback in the Big Ten. From a development standpoint, he's wildly further along than he was a year ago. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that all the questions have been answered, because 4 games is significant, but 4 games where 2 of them are against low-level FBS opponents and then 2 lower-level Big Ten opponents, I don't think that is enough to totally change the narrative yet.
Yeah. So we look at a strong play out of the quarterbacks. How is the offensive line doing, protecting him and giving him the time to throw the ball? That is where Luke Altmaier is kind of shocking when you look at his statistical accomplishments, considering he's been sacked more than anybody in the Big Ten right now.
I think this is another point of concern. The offensive line was a big curiosity coming into the season. Last year's starting left guard initially declared for the NFL draft, Emmanuel Pregnone, and then abruptly transferred to Oregon. So the guy who they expected to come back and anchor the offensive line just kind of left up out of nowhere to go get better money, which, it's his right. Do whatever you want. Yep. But they're a really young group. And it's interesting because they're all high school recruits. There are no transfers that start on this offensive line. Some of them are what you would call like project recruits who were not super highly rated, but with great physical intangibles who need to learn football. And I think this general sentiment is that all of them are ahead of schedule. The center is a walk-on named Killian O'Connor, who beat out a somewhat highly touted transfer from Syracuse, the general, Jayon Ray Reed. So that was a big surprise. And the left tackle is a guy named Elijah Page, who was injured actually in the first half against Michigan State and did not return in the second half, but the expectation is that he's going to play. And Elijah Page is the pro prospect of the group. He's the left tackle. He has the build. He's physical, but he also was dominated at times last year. You look at the tape in the Michigan game, and that kid would probably mortgage his parents' house to get that film wiped from the internet. It was so bad. But he's made progress. He's made strides, and it all circles around a change in the coaching there. There's a new offensive line coach, Zach Hansen, who previously was the tight ends coach. He replaced Josh Henson, who moved on to become the offensive coordinator at Purdue. And Zach Hansen has done a really impressive job with this group. He's built an offensive line that is multiple and diverse. It's shuffleable, which I think was illustrated nicely against Michigan State with Elijah Page out in the second half. It affected 3 different spots on the offensive line because of how they maneuver that loss. And if you were a casual observer, you wouldn't have noticed that anything had changed on the offensive line at all. They have been impressive. They've been surprising. And most importantly, they've been dominant in the running game. And I think that that's where this is all going to eventually point to here, Mike, is that what's different about this USC offense than the last 3 years under Lincoln Riley is it's the first season that they're tilted run heavy. And they're not just tilted a little run heavy, they're a lot run heavy. And they look like the Oklahoma offenses that he ran that were built around the counter run game and then play action. And all of those concepts are being used in spades right now because there's an exceptionally deep and talented running back group. And there's an offensive line that's proven it's mobile enough to, do those guard tackle pulling schemes and be able to land those blocks and maintain those blocks. So the offensive line and the quarterback are 2 pleasant surprises, I think. But the offensive line right now has been a strength that has far exceeded expectations. And I think if they can maintain this level of play against better competition, they're really where the ceiling of this team will be dictated, because Lincoln Riley has decided this is a team that's going to run the football. We're not doing the same thing we did the last 3 years where we're throwing 60% of the time. And that makes a big difference, not just in scoring points and yards. That makes a difference in game management and situational football. And so some of those games that slipped away a year ago, right, where you had 9 one-score games, 8 of which you had a lead in the fourth quarter, that's not going to be as daunting of a task to win those games. They were so reliant on the pass game last season and the last couple of seasons that left the door open for teams to come back late in games. Right now, they're showing the ability to shut that door, and that's all because of the offensive line and the running game.
Yeah, Illinois didn't have to worry about those one-score games. They've pretty much handled things and then got handled. So that has not come into play, although last year extremely well versed at that. When he goes back to pass, what kind of wideouts and tight ends are we going to be looking at? And is there any of them that you think you need to keep track of this gentleman?
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 likely first-round picks who start at wide receiver for USC, one of whom actually may not play, and I think it's probably doubtful that he does play. That's Jacoby Lane. The 2 guys are Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon, and they're brilliant complements to each other. Lemon is on the smaller side, but I wouldn't call him small. He's exceptionally quick, shifty, and great in the open field. He's the yard after catch kind of guy, but he's also sure-handed. Jacoby Lane is 6'4". He's got massive hands. Go pull up a video of his one-handed grab against Georgia Southern. He is tremendous in jump ball situations, and he's also a great deep threat. So potentially missing him for the second consecutive week is a big concern. The rest of the receiving core is not nearly as impressive. It's fairly young and a little bit transfer heavy where it's not as young. So I think that's a big question mark, is who fills that wide receiver 2 or 3 role, depending on what the personnel looks like. But the tight end room has been impressive. Lake McCree is the top tight end on this team. He's a great receiver. He's also a pretty good blocker. And then Walker Lyons, who's just a redshirt freshman, is probably a block first guy who they do like to get involved in the passing game. And one of the parallels between this USC team and the offenses Lincoln Riley ran at Oklahoma is the fact that they're running a ton of 22 personnel and 21 personnel. They're running a lot of 2 running backs, 2 tights, and they're running a lot of 1 running back, 2 tights. So you're going to see these guys out there consistently, particularly if Jacoby Lane doesn't play, because they'll be twice as committed to the run game probably. And also, I think the receiving options in the tight end passing game might be more compelling than the wide receivers behind Lemon and Lane. So it's a deep group. The receivers aren't as deep as they were a year ago because of a handful of losses to the transfer portal. But if both guys are healthy and Mekhi Lemon, barring an injury in practice this week, will play. I mean, he's been tremendous this season. And Jacoby Lane they're two of the top 5 wide receivers in the country, probably.
Wow. And then going into the backfield, Wayman Jordan's obviously he's on a big pace, averaging almost 8 yards a carry. And, you extrapolate it out, he's going to be well over 1,000 yards this year. So tell us a little bit about the backfield, because there's a couple other guys who are making some impressions back there as well.
Yeah, this Lincoln Riley said is the best running back room he's had at USC by a mile. And so far, the results have reinforced that. Wayman Jordan was a junior college transfer who there wasn't a lot of tape on. And it was interesting having him come in, because immediately the reviews in spring practice and then into fall camp were that he's clearly the top running back on the team, and B, he might be a one and done guy, with his transfer then leading to an NFL spot next season. And his performance has reinforced that. The guy looks both physically and stylistically a lot like Ashton Genty last year at Boise State. He's not quite as physical, but he's similarly really difficult to bring down, and also that tremendous combination of change of direction and top end speed. He does have both of those things. He loses no speed in and out of cuts. He's also a decent receiver, which allows them to do a lot in the screen game. And then they pair him with a guy named Eli Sanders, who transferred from New Mexico. And Eli Sanders was one of the top 5 yards per carry guys in the country a year ago. And he's small, but a true burner. There's tape from the Missouri State game where he catches a little underneath screen, and you watch him open up his stride. This guy's flying like 23 miles an hour down the sideline. He's that fast. And they make for a great pairing between the two of them. But what's interesting is there is a group of guys behind them who are competent and capable. The only one you'll probably see this week is King Miller, who is a walk-on freshman, actually, who's Dr. Dre's nephew, as funny as that is. But the coaches rave about him, and he's earned playing time despite the fact that he's not a heralded member of this group. And there are other freshmen who were recruited on scholarship and have high expectations who are behind him on the depth chart. So I'd be interested to see how much you see him. He only had about 3 or 4 snaps against Michigan State this past weekend. But the top 2 of Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders are dynamic. They're complementary. And Lincoln Riley has visibly had quite a bit of fun this year deploying them in different ways and using them at the same time. They're going to stress the defense by forcing linebackers to make choices that they're not comfortable making or not capable of covering. And, mismatches come in a lot of forms, and that's a new one at USC. The fact that there are 2 truly dynamic running backs that at any given time can score a touchdown from anywhere on the field.
So for Illini fans out there, it sounds like this is going to be the offensive equivalent of what they ran into with Indiana, an offense that can score from a lot of different ways and put pressures on defense from multiple angles. Only difference is maybe the offensive line might not be as good, but this certainly sounds like in the out at wide receiver and at running back and quarterback, USC is well equipped to compete with anybody.
I think that's certainly a fair point. I think that this team will go as far as its defense takes it ultimately, because the offense is going to probably be top 2, 3 in the Big Ten, if not at the top when the season's ended. At this point, you have to give Indiana the nod ahead of them because of the quarterback. Fernando Mendoza just has proven more. He's played more. He has more starts, more snaps. But I think Jaden Mayava has a higher ceiling in terms of what he can accomplish this season. But it's still fairly early in the year. There's still adversity that will strike. So if you're an Illini fan, I wouldn't be concerned that you're seeing, oh, shoot, we just got the wheels beat off us by this Indiana offense. Now here comes USC. They look the same. Yes, it's extremely dangerous, but it's still kind of like a baby deer learning how to walk. There's not enough proof of concept to go, this is a resilient offense regardless of circumstance. There's going to be a point at which someone exploits a weakness, and perhaps this is the week, and Illinois is the team to do that.
Yeah, we will find out. Now, folks, before we get into the defense and into the special teams, I wanted to talk a little bit about Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Now, what do these data brokers do? Well, your name, your contact information, your social security number, home address, even information about your family members could be compiled by these people and sold online. Have you ever been the victim of identity theft or harassment or doxing? If you haven't, you probably know someone who has. Delete Me can help. Take control of your data, keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me now at a special price for our listeners. Get 20% off of your Delete Me plan when you go join deleteme.com/HIT and use the promo code HIT at checkout. That's the only way to get 20% off. Go to deleteme.com/HIT and enter HIT at the checkout. That's join deleteme.com/HIT, code HIT. And of course, we would love to see you go ahead and go there and look at that 20% off as a little thank you for listening to Eye on the Illini and the IlliniGuys Sports Spectacular. Now, let's get back to what we're talking about here, Cooper, and let's wish some of those people would just get a job where they would stop causing these problems for all the rest of us, but that's not going to happen. So as we look at that defense, to me, as I look at this game, Illinois' offense needs to shore up whatever the heck they were doing and make USC work. And if USC can put pressure on Altmaier, it's going to be a problem because it probably will be hard to keep down the USC offense. So what does that USC defense throw at the Illini? And let's talk about the defensive line, which will, I'm sure, be looking at films of the Indiana game, trying to do what Indiana did and maybe even add a few wrinkles to that basic plan.
Yeah, I think from an Illini standpoint, the bad news is that the front four has been the clear strength of the USC defense to this point in the season. That defensive line has been quick. They've been strong. They've been living in the backfield. They're top 5 in the country in sacks right now. They have a couple of guys off the edge in Braylon Shelby and Cameron Crawford who can get after the quarterback. They have a defensive tackle in Jakeem Jarrett, who's like 370 pounds and had a pick 6 a couple weeks ago against Purdue. And they also have the top defensive line recruit in the freshman class in Jakeem Stewart, who was a monster against Michigan State. So that's not good news if you're an Illini fan. The good news, though, is that there are definitely big plays to be had in the passing game. The back 7, particularly the back 4 in the secondary, leaves a ton to be desired. And if you were going to circle one position group and say, this is the clear weakness of this team, you'd say the defensive backs. They're dealing with some injuries, which is a problem, not quite to the extent of what I understand is the case with y'all's team, but nonetheless, still a couple of pieces are not in the fold, and that's forced some shuffling that is problematic and has some guys playing out of position and has, specifically Kamari Ramsey, who's probably one of the better safeties nationally, playing nickelback, which on one hand, you like to have a guy who can cover a hole when you need it because you're deeper at safety than corner. But on the other hand, you now have a guy who's elite at one position being average at another. And that's suboptimal and less than ideal. So one thing that's been consistent the first 4 weeks of the season is that they're good for one catastrophic breakdown in coverage, maybe 2 every game. If you capitalize on it and get a touchdown out of it, boom, there's 7 points. That's one less possession you got to worry about driving the length of the field. It happened against Missouri State, happened against Georgia Southern, happened twice against Michigan State. They've not played a clean game back there yet this season, and I think that's a huge point of concern. That said, they've also shown that while they are not going to be a defense that gets teams off the field on 3 and outs very regularly, they will do 2 things well. The first is if you find yourself in 3rd and 7 or longer, you're probably not going to get the first down. That would be unlikely in most scenarios. The way defensive coordinator Danton Lynn calls the defense makes it even less likely against this defense specifically. He runs very exotic pressure packages. They're very difficult to decipher before the snap. And if you're Luke Altmaier, you got to get the ball out not just quickly, but the read has to be flawless in order to pick up a 3rd and long scenario. There's a reason why the defense, even last year, was among the top 5 in the country in 3rd and long defense. That said, they're not the best at getting to 3rd and long. So if you can stay in front of the chains, you immediately take away what is the clear strong point of the defense. And, that's going to come down to the offensive line play and things of that variety. The other aspect is, even though the defensive backs have not been great in man-to-man coverage and they have been prone to some communication and thus coverage breakdowns, they've been pretty good with the ball in the air. They had 3 picks against Purdue. They had a pick 6 against Missouri State. This last weekend against Michigan State was the first game in which the defense did not force a turnover. So they've been able to paper over a handful of uninspiring defensive drives where Purdue moved the ball well, for example, and then throws an interception in the end zone. So I'm not sure that this is a defense to be afraid of. It's definitely a defense that has some pieces that can cause huge problems, specifically up front. But it's also a defense that you can score points against, and the formula's been pretty straightforward. The DBs are pretty lousy, and the linebackers, with one exception of Eric Gentry, who's an alien in human form. He's 6'6" with a 7-foot wingspan and lives in the backfield. The rest of the linebacking core is not particularly inspiring. I think there's a lot of reason for optimism if you're Illinois' offense that perhaps you'll be able to throw the ball. You got to protect your quarterback somewhat, but there are holes here. They're not the same holes, though, of past seasons, and I think that would be a mistake of analysis going into this game, is to look at the past years, specifically the first 2 years of Lincoln Riley at USC, and say, man, those defenses were so bad. This is who USC is. We're going to be able to march up and down the field. It's not like that. The Danton Lynn defense is vastly different than the Alex Grinch defense, and this year's personnel, specifically up front, is far more well equipped to run that defense well than it was a year ago. So take that with a little grain of salt and be cautious in the way that you synthesize the information into expectations. But I don't think this is a doom and gloom scenario for Illinois, because there are going to be opportunities. The question is, will Luke Altmaier get the ball out of his hand quickly enough? And will he be accurate enough when under pressure to capitalize on those inevitable opportunities?
Yeah, so there's no shot of getting Grinch to come back for one game just to spice things up here, huh?
You're going to have to call up Wisconsin for that one. He's their problem now.
Yeah. And things are going swimmingly up in Madison. This is an interesting part that most people don't really think about, but we talk about it every week. What do you see going on in terms of the kicking game for USC? Punting and kicking are 2 things that are very much underrated until they have a problem.
It's an interesting question, because special teams have not been particularly notable to this point in the season, which tends to be a good thing. They haven't made any big plays on special teams. They haven't blocked any kicks. They haven't ripped off any big returns, but they've played clean. They haven't had any kicks blocked. The punter, who's a transfer from Valparaiso, has been consistent the small handful of times they've asked him to do his job. The kicker, who was not the original top choice at the spot, Ryan Sayeri, he was supposed to be the kickoff guy, while Hayden Chittenden, who's a transfer, was supposed to be the lead place kicker. He's been injured and unable to play. But Sayeri's actually been really good. He's been very consistent. They haven't asked him to do a lot in terms of kicking from distance, but he went 5 for 6 against Purdue. He's a pretty consistent kid. And I think that if the game comes down to a field goal, I'm not going to feel good or bad. I'll hold my breath a reasonable amount, because I haven't seen anything to make me feel great or feel panic, because they've been just steady. And there is always the possibility that the return game finally pops. Mekhi Lemon, who I mentioned at wide receiver, is their lead return guy. And last week, Michigan State's punt coverage team did an elite job on him, with the exception of one return that went for 22 yards. The rest of the time, he was living fair catching the ball back inside his own 15, so there wasn't a lot to be done there. But last year, he was pretty dangerous in the return game, had a couple of long ones, 60 to 80 yards. So I'd say that there's always a distinct possibility of something happening, but I'm not sure that it's more likely, because there hasn't been to this point. I'm not sure it's like a they're due kind of phenomenon, so much as I just don't think it's a point of emphasis. I think they really don't want to lose on special teams, but they don't really care about winning on special teams. And, As an onlooker, I'm kind of okay with that. It's better than it's been in past seasons. It's been better at other points, but it's largely not been notable, which is good.
Okay. So as you look at this game, do you have a prediction for us, or do you have a way you think this game is going to unfold?
I think this is a really tough, bad spot for USC. It's 9 a.m. Pacific time kick, which means that the game day starts at about 3:15 a.m. for these guys. That's not an excuse for anything, but I think it's reasonable to expect a potential slow start. I'm not sure that's a good thing. You couple that with opposing teams have been really good on their opening possessions of games against this defense as long as they're on script. Essentially, as soon as the script has run out and they're off script trying to adjust on the fly, the defense has played far better. But the opening series has been a problem. So I could see a very real scenario where if USC wins the toss and wants to receive a 3-and-out or a first down and punt, then an Illini touchdown. And that's a really different kind of flavor to a game than, USC marches down the field, scores a touchdown, and forces a 3-and-out. I think it's probably likelier than, a hot, fast start. I think my expectations for Illinois are uncertain because, like everyone else, I think my expectations were higher than what the Indiana game illustrated. And I'm not necessarily sure that that's a fair illustration of who Illinois is. So I think you got to take that with a real grain of salt in the same way that, I think USC is a lot better than what the final score of their game against Purdue would suggest, right? So I think the way it most likely plays out is something in the vicinity of like a 31-24 game. I don't think it's a coin flip, but I think it's probably a 60-40. I would like USC's chances in that. If they lose that game 31-24, I won't be the slightest bit surprised. I think that the spot between the early kickoff, the time zone travel, and the fact that Illinois is coming off of a game that was embarrassing and has a lot of motivation to correct course, I think that trio of things adds up to a pretty scary position if you're USC. But at the same time, they've also exceeded my expectations at basically every point to this season. And they've shown me tremendous growth, not just from a schematic X's and O's and execution standpoint, but also from a team resilience psyche standpoint. So I don't know that it's fair to say that they're likely to crumble in ways that they crumbled the last couple of seasons. But I think it's going to be a big test to that resilience. It's all probably going to hinge on whether or not this is the game the turnovers start. If USC turns it over twice, I think that takes Illinois' chances up to like 60%. If SC turns it over once, I think it's a coin flip. If they play perfect turnover-free football, I think they probably win that game. But I don't know. It's not the most decisive answer you're probably looking for, but I think that's because there's so many unknowns in this game. USC is still a commodity that no one, including the diehardest of diehard fans, can trust until they prove that they're trustworthy. And Illinois is a confusing commodity because last week's performance threw a wrench in everything. So I'm not sure. I think the offense comes back to earth a little bit, but I also think the defense makes some plays that people aren't expecting them to make. So I could see it being 31-24. I also could see it end up being like a 42-30 or 42-17. That's probably contingent on how well Illinois takes care of the football. But I think that somewhere in that 31-24 range is probably the likeliest one way or the other.
Yeah, I think this is one that is so hard to tell what is going to happen because I'm a big believer in you're never as good as your best game and you're not as bad as your worst game. I know Brett Bielema was pleased that his team was pissed off on the way back and on Sunday. So that's good. You worry about a team totally kind of cutting their feelings off and not responding at all. They seem to be responding in a way of wanting to justify their past rankings. But this is a test, and Illinois has to do well because you get Purdue the following week, but then you run into Ohio State comes to town, and then you have to go out to Washington, which has been a house of horrors for visiting teams. So winning the USC game might allow them to go 2-2 in the next 4 weeks, or maybe 3-1. You never know. Illinois is the one team that tends to be the team that upsets Ohio State. But after the Indiana game, that seems to be a very hard thing to predict. Not saying it won't happen, but it's much harder to predict. So Illini fans will be extremely nervous because they went into that game at Indiana thinking, well, Illinois has got to go there and play a good game. They might win. Indiana's got the home field advantage and an incredible coach. Maybe they win by a touchdown. Nobody saw 65-10 coming up, and I'm sure Brett Bielema feels the same way. So as an Illini fan, you're feeling like you're walking on eggshells this week, and you would prefer to have someone other than USC's offense showing up. It's the Big Ten. You don't get to choose, and every team has those tough games that they've got to win, and a lot of times they aren't in the most convenient of circumstances.
No,
Overall,
to the
go ahead.
scheduling point, USC's in kind of the same boat here, where this is the first flagship test of the season. Then you got a bye week. You go to Michigan, or you have Michigan come to town. You go to Notre Dame, and then you go to Nebraska. So this game is kind of the bellwether on what are expectations for the season. Is this a team that seriously could potentially go 10-2 and maybe make a playoff, or is this a much improved 9-3, 8-4 team? I think we'll know a ton more about that based on this game this weekend. And I think that it's concerning that there could be a little bit of a look ahead component on USC's side. I don't think coaches would ever acknowledge that, but the confluence of seeing what's coming up on the schedule mixed with what that Indiana game looked like last week, I don't think it's unreasonable to be wary of the possibility that this game doesn't get the attention and respect that it probably deserves.
Well, I think Illinois, in all fairness, and the same is going on with Indiana, and Indiana fans are mad, but neither team's been good enough long enough for the rest of the country to say they're a known commodity. We saw the same thing happen with Kansas State, which arguably before Snyder got there was the worst program in the country. And it took him almost 8 years for people to finally respect Kansas State and not be like, how are these guys up there? And so it does take time to earn that street cred, and Illinois hasn't done it. And even Indiana with Signetti, they still need more time before people start looking at them that way. And I do think there is an issue here. I also think the interesting thing is that the local media are probably more concerned about the Fighting Illini than the national media is, which is kind of interesting. I listened to several podcasts today where the national people were saying, well, Illinois is not as bad as what they were against Indiana. And so they're thinking that this will be a fantastic game. And I know some of the local media is a little bit concerned with the injuries and the way the offensive lines played, that Indiana may have just drawn up a nice template for the rest of the Big Ten to use. So we will see which of those points of view is correct. It's Illinois fans, when you look at that Indiana game and when people say, why are Illinois fans pessimistic? Well, that Indiana game is exactly why Illinois football fans are pessimistic, because when Illinois gets things rolling, you have things happen, like in 1983 when Illinois played UCLA in the Rose Bowl at the end of the 83 season, and Illinois would have beat that team 8 times out of 10, but they played them on one of the days that was the 2 out of 10 and looked really bad doing it. So this was I know sometimes Brett Bielema wonders, like, these Illinois fans are nuts. Why are they so paranoid? Well, the Indiana game shows you why. So there'll be some Illinois fans who are holding their breath when that opening kickoff comes, hoping that the offensive line will get a little bit of the fight back and that the defense will be able to play with maybe some smoke and mirrors against a very formidable USC offense. But if both teams play a good game, it should be entertaining. And that's all you can ask for. And especially as an Illinois fan who has watched so many years of good teams coming in and just spanking the Illini, Brett Bielema rarely has the nights like he had at Indiana. So you're hoping that doesn't become a new thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think just as football fans, it's important to just look for good games at competitive football as opposed to hoping for blowouts. I don't think that really does anything for anybody other than the handful of fans that can't stomach even a little bit of an anxiety during a football game. So cheers to hoping that it's a great one. I think the formula is there and the blueprint's laid down. We'll see if they follow it or if we get something that's not on the bingo card. But there are a lot of intriguing points here.
Yep, this looks like a good one. Thank you so much for coming on. And of course, folks, if you've enjoyed this, you can go to IlliniGuys.com. You can subscribe for $99 a year. That will get you access to everything behind the paywall. The most important thing is the message board, where you can actually send messages back and forth with Larry, Brad, Ked, Matt, myself. And so it's not just a passive thing where you're reading what we have to say or listening to us, but you get that two-way interaction. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd love to have you there. Like and subscribe. And anytime you can share something of ours online, we greatly appreciate it, as that's the way you grow. And of course, every week you can listen to our show, the IlliniGuys Sports Spectacular, that's on over 20 stations throughout the state of Illinois, including stations like WJBC in Bloomington, WLS in Chicago, WDWS in Champaign. You get all of us, all of us on there, and you can hear it. You go to IlliniGuys.com, go to the radio tab, and you can see what day and what time we're on, Friday or Saturday, and get ready for the game. And of course, you can also listen to that on podcast along with Eye on the Illini. Until next time, folks, go Illini.